Hi everybody, you're listening to a career advice webinar by the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, the professional association for chemists in Australia. I'm Dave Samet, coordinator of the RACI's mentoring program. Tonight we're holding this webinar in collaboration with the Australian Institute of Food Science and Technology, AIFST. As part of our Exploring Careers Opportunities series, we'll be discussing the types and range of job opportunities within the food industry. From their website, formed in 1967, the Australian Institute of Food Science and Technology represents food system professionals working in all facets of the food industry: food science, food technology, engineering, sensory, new product development, innovation, regulatory, QA, nutrition, microbiology, and food safety, as well as those in leadership positions within the academic, industry, and private sectors. Our panelists tonight are professionals in the sector, all in different parts of their career. Drawing from their individual experiences, they will be giving some insight into what a career in this industry looks like. We welcome you to ask questions at any point using the Q&A function, which allows people to vote up or down, I suppose, questions. Before we start this evening's panel session, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting all around Australia. We recognise the elders, past, present and emerging, and also recognise their contributions as Australia's first scientists and engineers, building a healthy and safe community, what they've done and what we can still learn from their ways. We'd also like to thank the 2021 sponsors of the RACI Career Development Program, DCS Technical, Envirolab and Laboratory Credit Union. So thank you to all of our panellists for this evening. We have Fiona Fleming, Chief Executive Officer at the AIFST, Dion Mahoney, Head of Food Safety at PMA Australia New Zealand, and Ashna Gobin, Food Technologist at Edlin Foods. Thank you very much all. Let me just move this out the way. Okay, starting with you, Fiona, could you give us an introduction to yourself and your role in your organisation?
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all tonight. So as Dave said, I'm the CEO of AIFST, the industry body. So I guess my role is to fulfil our mission and purpose, which is to support food scientists and to champion food science in industry, out there in academia, with government, with the industry. So really to be the voice of food science.
Thank you very much. How did you get to where you are in your career?
Well, I started off and I did a degree in food science and technology many years ago. In fact, I think one of my colleagues reminded me it was 40 years ago that I actually started my degree, so it doesn't feel like that long. And when I started, I actually wanted to be a dietitian, but I couldn't study dietetics, so had to do it as a postgraduate. So started food science. Convinced my parents that, you know, people are always going to have to eat, so I was probably going to always be in a job. Did my 4-year degree and then decided I was sick of studying, so thought I'd better get a job, and have been working in the food industry ever since, in various, mainly working in food manufacturing. I did go back at one point and do a master's in nutrition management just to sort of go back to my, you know, what I originally wanted to do. But I've always mainly worked in food industry, and then the last 10 years have been consulting, and in the last 4 years, taken on the role of CEO of AIFST, but I've been a member since I finished uni, so I've always had an association with it.
Fair enough. Well done you. We'll go to our youngest panellist, Ashna. Could you give us an introduction?
So I have been a chef for 10 years, so my background hasn't been from academic, and my curiosity has led me to study food science. And after that, I joined the RACI, so I was a mentee like any other student that is today looking at, so I've been in their place. I joined the AIFSC at the same time, and I did a few product development competitions, and I thought that that is something that I would love to do. So I managed to find a role while I was studying and doing my undergrad food and nutrition science, and did a few roles at Simplot Australia, and then I did at Yumi's, which is now owned by George Western Food, and I just joined Edlin Food as a food technologist.
Excellent, thank you very much. Dion.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening, everybody. Next year will mark the 50 years since I left school and went and worked in the local dairy factory. So I am certainly the senior member of this panel, the baby boomer. And I worked in the dairy factory as a QA guy, but then I travelled to Sydney went to college, then went to university studying dairy technology, dairy science, and then specialised in microbiology. Hence, that's why I work in food safety from a food microbiology perspective. Through my career over those many years, I've worked in academia. I've spent 13 years working in colleges and universities as an academic, been involved in industry development, a lot of work overseas, capacity building in developing countries, in the food safety, the food regulation area, and most recently in Australia in food regulation, food standard setting. Currently, I'm head of food safety at PMA Australia New Zealand. PMA is part of a global organisation, the Produce Marketing Association, with its headquarters in the United States. The vision for our organisation is to bring together the global produce and floral communities to grow a healthier world. That's our vision. Our mission is specifically to connect, inform, and deliver industry solutions that enhance members' prosperity. So my role in this member-based organisation in Australia, and New Zealand, where we have some 300 members, approximately 300 members, is to support them to produce and create safe products and lead to a healthier world. It's a very noble objective.
Excellent. Well done, you. Now, I have to ask the fun question. If you've been helping do food safety overseas, what's the most interesting foodstuff you've worked with along the way there?
It's always a challenge when you work in these countries because the local people that I work with, who traditionally have been, or typically are government officials, they take you out to eat local foods. And I guess for foreigners, they try and find something that you are not prepared to eat. And I've never fallen away from any of those challenges. So it's snake blood and snake bile in alcoholic drinks, of course, in Vietnam, and but it's also eating intestine of pregnant sow on the side of the Mekong River in Laos, People's Democratic Republic. So a lot of different products. Balut, which are fertilized duck eggs, which contain cooked but contain an emerging duck embryo. Probably I'm offending vegetarians and vegans, but you get challenged by some of these types of products. So some pretty weird products, and of course you look at them through a lens of food safety. You look at them and think, well, this is snake's blood. What could it possibly contain that might make me feel less than healthy the next day?
Wow. Excellent. All right. Sorry, I've just got my list of questions here. I guess the key question is, and might as well stick with you for a moment, Dion, what do you love most about your job? What do you enjoy most about the area you work in?
Working in fresh produce, you're working in an industry which is safe, healthy, I should say. We're encouraged to eat more fresh produce, more vegetables, more fruits. So in the past, I've worked in sectors like the meat industry, the seafood industry, the dairy industry. The thing about working in PMA is that I'm working with plant products, and I'm working with, salt of the earth type products, farmers producing fresh produce. The diversity is enormous. In the horticulture sector, we've probably got 250 different food products, and they all present interesting challenges in terms of food safety. So something like a banana, which you peel, it grows off the ground, it's a safe product. Obviously, there's some sprays and there's sometimes chemical interventions used in their production. On the other end of the scale, though, we have leafy greens, which present, like a lettuce, a bagged lettuce or a lettuce unpacked, spinach leaves, those types of products growing near the soil. The issue of irrigation, water, issue of hygiene, and the potential for food safety challenges means that I've got a lot of work in that area and a lot of challenges to deliver messages to ensure that we get these products to consumers in a safe manner. So the diversity is there, and plenty of challenges, and each day there is a new challenge or there is a new issue that we need to address.
Fair enough. Anything you dislike about your job?
Not really. there's, when I say plenty of challenges, one of the issues that I think is really important in my job is to tell farmers that they're not actually farmers, they're actually food producers, and they're creating a food product. So don't think of it as a commodity, think of it as a food. So the challenge for me there is to make sure that they understand that what they're producing is actually going to be on someone's plate, and it might be on their plate in a restaurant or in the home in Sydney, or it could be in an export market, it could be in China, Beijing, or it could be in Tokyo, and then they need to think about the consumer. So that's not something I dislike. It's the challenge of educating and ensuring people understand where we're coming from and what we need to achieve.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Fiona, do you want to have a go at the question about what you like and dislike? You're going to answer it as a consultant, or you're going to answer it as the CEO of AIFST?
Oh, I'm going to answer it as being in the food industry. I think Dion's probably stolen my thunder a bit. I think what gets me up in the morning is just the variety, and every day is different. I guess the broad spectrum of areas that we can work in. Not just this job that I'm doing now, but working in industry, there's always challenges out there. It's always changing. And the community of food scientists, there's the food industry in Australia is quite small. Everybody kind of knows each other. I just love the opportunities that being a food scientist provides, and the opportunities that I've had in the industry. Yeah.
And what do you dislike?
What I don't like bad science. So, I guess, and we've talked a lot about this within AIFST, we want to be science-based. And so we work really hard to put sound science across. And what I really dislike is bad science. So people who are lazy, people who haven't done, a thorough assessment of what they're doing, or people that just speak and don't actually know what they're talking about.
Fair enough. I've seen that along the way. To both of you, before I come to you, Ashna, to both of you, I mean, you've both been in the industry for a goodly while. I would imagine that food science would be one of those areas that has just massively changed over the years with the introduction of instrumental techniques, with the, with the advances in the science that we can bring to food science. It must be substantial.
Yes, it has, but you know what? You still need to get back to basics.
Right.
And I think, what I would say to people coming into the industry is get the basics, get that under your belt, understand why things happen, why they work, why you do things in a certain way. I mean, hopefully you've all heard of, the concept of HACCP, hazard analysis, critical control points. It's a risk assessment, process. And I think we just need to understand the basics before we can then move on to the more complicated, sophisticated, techniques and things. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, if I can pick up on that, Food Australia is coming out, or it's coming out today or tomorrow, and I've written an article in there about food preservation and validation. And I talk about canning. Now, this is a technique that was developed by Appert in the time of Napoleon, centuries ago. But canning encapsulates so much about food science and technology that if we get canning right, it's about a sealed container. We think of a can as a can, but it can be a plastic bag as well. That's a can as well when it's sealed. No oxygen is inside. But the heat treatment, looking at heat penetration, looking at the potential for mishandling of the product. The principles of that resonate back in the 17th century as they do now in the 21st century. But in the time I've been around, there's been enormous advances, particularly in the analysis area, in terms of the sophistication of methods to test for. And I can remember us doing techniques in the dairy factory in the 70s, which we were looking for pesticide residues. The sophistication, the equipment that's available now is light years ahead of where we were back at that time. But then that presents problems because we can detect ever decreasing amounts of contaminants. And in terms of our food regulations, some of the regulations, if it's not specifically mentioned, any presence detected means the product doesn't meet the requirements of the Food Standards Code. And we can detect, tiny, beyond nano levels of contaminants in foods. There's also been some really significant advances. Back in the 70s in Australia, we had real problems, as did globally, the dairy industry, with salmonella, the pathogenic bacteria salmonella, in milk powders and in infant formulas. Now, through the application of methods like Fiona mentioned, HACCP, to identify hazards and then look at control points, our enhancements in hygienic design, our enhancements in environmental monitoring, means that salmonella in milk powder now is a very rare event, a very rare occurrence. And that we used to think of milk powders, I mean, our standards still require very extensive testing of milk powder for salmonella. N equals 60 samples from a batch need to be tested. So that's a huge impost on a manufacturer. But we know that through the processes of hygienic practices, hygienic design, biosecurity, you know, keeping people out of premises and having good security in terms of pests, etc., we've managed to effectively eliminate this as a problem. So there's been real advances. And then there's the sophistication of the technology that we use today in terms of processing food products.
Very interesting. Ashna, coming to you. What do you love about your job?
I love that every day is different. It's so diverse. So you wake up, you plan your day, and it never happened the way that you planned. So that's what I love, because it's just so exciting. Every moment keeps changing. And that's what makes me go to work every single day.
You know, it's interesting that all three of you have said that, because I would have thought that a potential downside of working in food is that there would be a certain amount of routine analysis. You know, it's the same product that has to be analysed day in and day out. So it's interesting that just hasn't been mentioned.
Well, if you look at, say, the dairy industry, you know, raw milk comes into a factory, but because of seasonal variations in the cow and what it's eating, the milk changes on a regular basis. So if you're making a product out of that, you need to be on top of the fact that the fat content does fluctuate. The chemical components in that milk do change. And so if you're making yogurt, it may not set as easily because you need to tinker with your processes to address those subtle changes. And that occurs across many different sectors of the food industry.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, Dave. So I spent a great part of my career in working for George Western Foods, so Tip Top, and Western Milling. And, you know, to pick up on Dion's point, I mean, wheat changes every season and every state is different. So wheat that's grown in Western Australia really isn't suitable for making bread in New South Wales. So, you know, every harvest we get wheat coming in, we have to get it tested. We have to, you know, change the formulations of the products. So yeah, there is a lot of routine in terms of the testing, but I guess what it really brought home to me was how important that was for, you know, even something as simple as a loaf of bread just to get it out there, or even a bottle of milk. You know, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Just recently, for example, one of the other companies or brands that I looked after was Twinings, so English breakfast. Guess how many blends of tea go into an English breakfast?
It would be unimaginably high.
43.
Wow.
And I met so there's one person who's got a job based in Twinings in England, and his job is to make sure that English breakfast tastes the same every single batch.
Wow.
So his job is to blend the tea. And even as, you know, recently as last week, I was working with a coffee company. They've got, what did he say, 10 different beans that go into 10 different different types of coffee, green coffee beans that go into their blend.
Wow. Well, it is very interesting.
So there's science, but there's also, I guess, all that, you know, and Ashna being a chef would know that, you know.
Especially my previous role at UMI. So you would not think that making a dips would be that hard, but with seasonality, for example, you're making beetroot, it changes and the color changes, and you'll think that it's going to be same color all year round, but it won't. But you have to make it same color because that's what the customer is expecting. So that's how it changed. But yeah, it is exciting to work with things like that.
Very interesting. I have to ask a slightly off the wall question, only because it occurred to me only this morning. I was looking at a bottle of lactose-free milk and thinking, how does that come to exist? Is it as simple as we simply add lactase to it to process, to metabolize the lactose, and that's how it ends up lactose free?
Yep. Yep.
That's
And sweeter as a result.
Really?
Yeah. Well, if you taste lactose-free milk, you've broken down the lactose molecule into, what is it, glucose and galactose, I think.
Right.
Glucose and galactose.
Sorry, I can't remember, but it is sweeter. It is sweeter than normal milk as a result.
Isn't that interesting? Okay.
Yeah.
See, off the wall question, not related to careers, but never mind. Okay, how about this? When you graduated from university, did you have a clear idea of what field you wanted to go into? Anyone who wants to jump in? Fiona, looks like you want to go.
When I graduated, well, no, probably not. My parents told me to get a job. I was fortunate that I was offered a couple of different jobs working in a manufacturing environment. And I'm forever grateful that I took one of those jobs because, I guess, where my heart is in manufacturing. I'm happy wandering around factories and talking to people in factories and, sharing, learning with them. I think one of the funniest things for me was when I started working at George Weston Foods. So I worked in the bakeries and I was the second food technologist the company had employed. And my induction program involved going into the bakeries. And in those days, the bakeries were only allowed to operate from 11 o'clock at night through the night. So they weren't allowed to bake during the day. So the bread was fresh. I was the only female in the factory. And in fact, there were no female toilets. So, and I was a bit of a novelty because I was a young female. But the guys in the bakeries, once they figured out, well, they didn't really know what a food technologist was, but, they were happy to talk to me and tell me what they did. And I learned so much from those guys. And to this day, I'm actually still in contact with some of those guys. So,
yeah. I think that's one of the great lessons for all of us is when you do work in a factory, the person who knows the most about anything that's going on is the person who's been on that shop floor for 30 years.
Yep.
And they've seen it all, they've done it all, they know every trick.
Mm. Yep.
That does answer one of your questions about working hours and work-life balance, Dave.
Right. Knock yourself out. Has work-life balance been an issue throughout your career? And working hours?
There's never enough hours.
I've never been at home.
I mean, it sounds from your job in food safety that you would do a lot of travel.
Yeah, I have. I was very fortunate that I got involved with the World Health Organization and also FAO and briefly with the International Labour Organization, all UN agencies, and worked in a whole series of developing countries supporting food safety initiatives, be it training, developing legislation, setting up food inspection systems, educating people, doing foodborne illness analysis, that sort of thing. So, but to go back to your question you asked about, did I have a clear plan? It's interesting. I sat down with an Aifst team member yesterday who I first met as a student here in Melbourne in 2013, and we talked about his career and where he spent a whole lot of time in the UK. I said, did you ever have a 5-year plan? And he said, not really. And it's not been something that I've ever had. I've never said, this is where I want to go to. When I left work and went to college, the dairy company I worked with supported me to go to college for 3 years. But in that time, I had a microbiology lecturer who took me under his wing and got me inspired in food microbiology. And so instead of going back to work at the factory after I finished my studies, I went on then to higher degree studies at Sydney University because I got interested in microbiology. And then it was a case of, oh, look, over here something interesting is happening. And then I went there, and then over here is something. So I didn't have any sort of strategic or single line of vision in terms of where I wanted to be in 5 years and 5 years and 5 years and 10 lots of that. It was what was interesting, what was a challenge. I could never see myself spending, as some of my friends have, spent 35 years in one job, it was never going to work for me. I was looking for stimulation, looking for something interesting, and somewhere where, you know, basically I could make some sort of difference.
Thank you very much. So Ashna, you and your husband, if I got this correct, you both were chefs for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then you went back to university at the same time together. And of course, you were saying before this started that you're now working together as well.
Yep.
Was that a plan?
It never happened as a plan. We never planned all of those. It just happened to be luck. So to go to study together, I think that was a plan, because it was unfair for one to study and the other one to work full time. So we're like, if we may as well be in trouble, we'll be in trouble together. So
Right.
that was kind of the way we tried to do it. And this way, I think it was heaps better, because when we were doing our studies during COVID and everything went through online, and you needed to have this questions or your friend buddy to ask this question, I think that really helped us to really understand and work together. For the second questions, no, we didn't plan to work together. I never ever thought that I would be working together. It just happened that I was lucky that the interview went well, and then they kind of like two person with the same idea, same background. And where I currently work at Edlin Food, they are most food service, so they deal a lot with restaurants, cafes, and it make more sense for them to hire to food tech who has a chef background, because you can recreate what is actually happening behind the scenes. So I can really make a product and know that being a chef, this is how you're going to use it. So they kind of have this two strong food tech who also have a chef background. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think it matters what career you're in. If you know and understand the role of your customer, you're going to be a lot more successful. So, okay, what do we do next? Obviously, our particular membership is more chemists than microbiologists. Can you tell us a little bit about the diversity of roles of chemists in the food sciences?
I can go first. And my senior food technologist, she doesn't have a food science background. She has a chemist background. So she used to work in BP, and then she decided to change her career without even doing any further study, and just went into doing kind of a micro role, and then work her way up into product development. And all these chemistries and doing flavors profile and different, all of those kind of, when we have really technical problems and technical things, she really can use her chemistries and really gets to where we need to go for technical issues. So from her perspective, I think it's really good to have a chemistry background and where she comes from.
Thank you very much.
I think, I take a bit of a step back and think, being a scientist is a way of thinking. It's the way your brain works. You're inquisitive. You want to know things. You want to understand how things work. And so I liken it to people saying, well, to Dion's point, I myself have worked with lots of different food categories, and I come into a new food category bringing what I know, but then I always want to learn things. So I think that, a food chemist can work in all sorts of different areas, maybe starting out in a laboratory, because that's where people would sort of think that's where you'd start, but you can go into product development. Ashna just mentioned flavors. You can certainly work in quality assurance. You can, because I think it's just having that way that your brain works as a scientist. You can apply that to whatever you're curious about. So, and don't ever limit yourself, I think I've been fortunate that I've worked with managers and people who've always encouraged me to kind of stretch myself. So as a consequence, I feel a bit like Dion. I've got involved in lots of different things that may not necessarily have been my day job per se, but I've enriched what I've done and been able to bring more to the role that I've got.
Absolutely. Sticking with you for a moment, Fiona, and I will come to you, Dion, to get your perspective, but sticking with you for a moment, you said to your parents at the beginning of your career, people got to eat. There's always going to be a job. Now, in the COVID era, I would imagine that is as true as ever. So I would imagine that your membership are reporting that perhaps your industry, or at least the employment in your industry, is not as badly affected as it might have been in other industries?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I mean, you know, there's been a lot of what we call offshoring going on over the last few years, where companies are actually taking their technical resource offshore, and then, you know, Australia just becomes a bit of a remote outpost. And as a consultant, that actually works in my favour, because I work a lot in the food regulation, and Dion's the same in that food regulation, food safety space. So a lot of my work was, you know, dealing with companies who had realised that they'd offshored their technical resource and they don't have the knowledge that we have here locally. So I think we're seeing a bit of, there's a new term, if you haven't heard, reshoring, which is, you know, the government's investing heavily in manufacturing, including food, and they're trying to encourage manufacturers to come back into Australia. And, you know, it's really important to have that technical understanding of the, you know, the market here, the regulations here, the food here. You know, there was a lot of concern during COVID that we rely very heavily on imports, when in fact we don't. We import about 10% of our food. So a lot of it is grown here, and a lot of it is exported. We're a net exporter of food. And, you know, the future for the industry here is to actually add value to our commodities, so that we, you know, we're very smart. We need to add value to those commodities, and, you know, food science is where that's all going to happen.
Very nicely said. Dion, have you a perspective to add here?
Well, just picking up on Fiona's point too, during COVID-19, food industry was seen to be an essential industry sector, so we had to keep the industry going. Obviously, certain sectors like food service and restaurateurs, you know, really did suffer badly, but people were at home, they were cooking, they were practicing new recipes, etc. So there's been some pretty strong growth. Early in the pandemic, there was strong growth in you know, the staples of potatoes and carrots, and less so for the more perishable products, if we talk about horticulture. So the industry was kept going, and in fact, one of the things that Fiona and I were involved in was providing guidance and assistance to industry to make sure that they could keep their doors open, not from a food safety perspective, but from a worker health perspective, that we needed to initiate guidance and advice on how you keep your workers safe and protect your supply chains. There were situations in Victoria where some of the distribution centres had some challenges, and you shut down a distribution centre for one of the major supermarkets, and that there's a whole food security issue then that comes to the fore. So you need to manage that really effectively. So
there were a couple of COVID outbreaks at abattoirs too, weren't there?
Yeah, more so overseas than in Australia, but there was a couple of outbreaks here in Victoria in abattoirs, and the abattoirs and chicken poultry processing facilities were particular environments because workers are very close together, side by side, and high density. A lot of other sectors, the food industry, where there's use of robotics or there's a lot of mechanisation with packaging, etc., it wasn't such a problem, but massive outbreaks in the US and in Germany associated with meat processing facilities. So our guidance was about, you know, the physical separation, the need for good personal hygiene, the need for advanced effective hand washing and hand sanitation, and importantly, keeping teams separate. So, you know, that was a role for us during the early times of COVID-19, was giving advice and guidance to industry on how to keep the doors open and keep them functioning. But going back to the original question about where chemists can fit in, obviously there's the food analysis part of it. We've talked about product development. This afternoon we had a science meeting at Aifst, and we had one of the guys on the line that's a toxicologist, very actively involved in things like mercury in fish, acrylamide, a byproduct of deep frying of starchy foods, important work in the toxicology area. And then there's things like validation. You know, if you're in a processing facility, you might be producing a leafy green product. You're using sanitizers to reduce the contamination on leaves. You need to do validation studies. You need a chemist to look at the way the product is being handled, the efficacy of things like a chlorine sanitizer or a peracetic acid type product, and doing those validation studies which are needed to assure the regulators that you're doing the right thing.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I love this question. I've come to the right, but what role does regulation play in food tech jobs? Is it an industry that is more regulated than others?
If you talk to the manufacturers, they will say they are. If you talk to public health experts, they'll say not so.
Well, I can quote you some stats. I think I did some work. We published a report earlier in the year on looking at the future of the food manufacturing system in Australia, and one of the kind of impediments is regulation. And we're regulated by some 20 different government departments across Commonwealth and state, and something like 40 or 50 different pieces of legislation. So yes, we are probably not regulated enough if you talk to a consumer. But yeah, it is, our view of utopia would be New Zealand, one government.
Yeah. So, if you look at regulation, the public and us as consumers, we don't want erosion of regulation on health, on water, on air travel or food. We really don't want a slackening off and a laissez-faire situation. So food law is there to protect people. It's interesting, Dave, at the beginning you talked about water quality and regulation on water quality. The Pure Food Act in the United States was introduced in 1906. I think the Pure Food Act in Australia was 1901. And that was because of widespread, predominantly adulteration of foods. People were substituting, some of those lead lakes have got beautiful colours, so they're great for colouring food. But lead's rather toxic. Or putting in calcium, substituting flour and putting water in milk. They were the basis for a lot of the food regulations that started out. And we've evolved now, but still food fraud is still an issue. But the consumers do want assurance about the safety of food products. But
well, of course, that was the key issue. The Australian baby formula is so popular after the melamine contamination, or I shouldn't say contamination, adulteration.
Yes.
In China. And I was actually recently learned the basis of it. I had been completely unaware, but milk products are rated based on their nitrogen content because it speaks to the presence of the milk proteins.
Correct.
And so the contaminant had been added because it was a highly nitrogenated compound.
Yes. Yep.
Never mind that it was incredibly toxic, but it artificially inflated the nitrogen content of the product.
Yep. So an 18th century practice of food adulteration in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was all about the fact that we we established the protein concentration by measuring nitrogen through a Keldale distillation. Put in melamine, which contains high levels of nitrogen, and hey presto, you've fooled the analyst. And yeah.
Wow. We do have a couple of questions coming from the floor. Fiona, you mentioned that you did consulting for a few years. Pardon me. What areas did you work in the food industry? And what does a typical day look like for you?
Well, I'm still consulting actually. So my AIFST job is part-time and I consult the other part of it. My specific areas, and I guess where my passion is food policy and regulation. So I work with companies, doing things as vast as so yesterday I ran a workshop on food regulation for a company. I do packaging reviews, so check packaging to see if it's compliant with the regulations. I may get involved in a product development project right at the beginning, working with the marketing team and the product developers, asking questions like, well, we want to make a claim about immunity. Everybody wants to claim immunity at the moment. Or we want a product that does this, or this is our product, what can we say about it? So that's sort of the food regulation. I also get involved in writing applications to FSANZ to change the food standards code. Earlier today we were talking about within AIFST, talking about making a submission to the Federal Department of Health on changing the FSANZ Act, which is what governs our food regulator. And the other area that I tend to do a lot of work in is sort of recalls and crisis management. So running recall workshops, assessing recall plans, training again. So I don't really have a typical day. It can change as well. When I get a phone call, there's always been a joke with me because my mobile phone number ends in 911, which, was a bit of a joke when I was working in industry. But, I could get a phone call in the morning saying, look, we've got a potential food recall issue. Can you help us? And that's happened to me a couple of times. So, yeah.
Right. We should do you the courtesy, Ashna, of asking the same of you. You're towards the beginning of your career. You're in a product development role. What does a typical day look like for you?
So a typical day is I'll go to the office, I'll write everything I have to do today, and I never get it done. Basically what's in my list. But most of the time we're running projects, so new product development. So sometimes what happens is we might be trying to match a product from an existing product, so we do a lot of work on that. The other is completely new, out of nowhere. We just like vegan is a new thing happening now. Everybody wants to have a vegan claims on their packagings, so we try to make vegan products. And my previous role was working on burgers, where vegan burgers was all the trendies and during COVID. So some of those, it changes every single day. We also have meeting with marketing and think and change. All of a sudden, yesterday they wanted A and today they want Z. So
now I'm fascinated to hear about talking with marketing.
Yes. So
what's that relationship
they're lovely.
like?
They want to have everything possible, and they have high achieving goals, and we always like, no, we can't claim this and we can't claim that, we can't make these, but yeah. So we worked. So I work with different organizations within the department, different departments. So we'll work with the QA team to make sure that everything is aligned and we're following all the procedures. There's no allergen, or we're not bringing any more allergen in the factory, even if we are creating a new food. We'll be working with the sales people. We have a chef on site, so they'll be making the food, and we'll go taste it and see whether their ways of making it, is it feasible to make it in large scale. And sometimes when we make bench work in small, it doesn't mean that it's going to replicate exactly what happened in a large scale. So there's a few challenges that we would need to work along, which makes it more exciting and make it fun every single day.
Absolutely. I'm curious, do you do all of this within the context of a set of standards like ISO 9000 or something like that?
We do it, the ISO 9000, and now we are making a new one, which is the IQF. So they are doing all this coming up now.
So there'll be a fair bit of documentation associated with it, then that as well.
There's a lot of documentations happening now behind the scene because we are transiting to the SQF food standard, but that is all done with the QA team, but we work very closely with them to make sure that we are all compliant with all the documentation, and we have to make sure that everything that we done is really, we have all traceability. It's not like we're just having it in a paper documentation and we're not having it all set to the team. So it's all saved in the central locations, and we all have to abide by the regulations.
Interesting. Thank you. One of our attendees has put their hand up, Abhilasha. Abhilasha, can I ask you to just pop your question into the Q&A, and then we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you've got to question. Nareen has asked, could you talk about more what you did with the WHO and how it was like working with them?
Yes, thanks for that question, Nareen. Interesting working for an international agency. I started working, my first assignment was actually in the Pacific. I was, as a food safety expert, I did some work in Tonga, drafting some food legislation for their Ministry of Health, but also doing some work on an outbreak of typhoid fever in a village situation. So they actually took me to the hospital where the people were suffering from typhoid fever as a result of exposure to contaminated food. And then I just work in the Cook Islands. I've worked at 25 different country offices, but I've also worked in the regional office in New Delhi. So I was looking at regional food safety issues for the Southeast Asian region, which has got 11 countries: India, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan, North Korea, surprisingly, but I never got to travel to North Korea, unfortunately. And then I did some work in headquarters, WHO headquarters in Geneva. So normative work, doing work, actually drafting the global strategy for food safety, which after almost 20 years, they're just in the process of redrafting that global strategy, which is the one I wrote back in 2002. Interesting challenges. At the country level, you're dealing with local issues. At the regional office, you're dealing with regional strategies and approaches, and at headquarters, doing different work. An enormously bureaucratic organisation. You've probably seen some of the challenges that WHO is facing at the moment with the pandemic and the concerns about its relationship with China and the very strong financial involvement of China in some of these UN agencies. That's a separate issue, but it's a political issue. It's a very political organisation. A couple of years ago, I had a mentee from the University of Melbourne doing a food science postgraduate qualification, and I was mentoring her. And she actually applied to WHO and went to Geneva as an intern and spent about 3 months in Geneva. Unfortunately, this was all done at her cost. WHO is a difficult organisation to get engaged in. I never worked there full time. I was always engaged as a consultant for periods of, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks. The longest assignment I did was 18 months working on food safety reforms in Vietnam. So over a period of 20 years, I probably have spent about 3.5 years working for WHO in some, quite unique circumstances. But it's fabulous work because you're doing something which makes a difference, either country, regional, or headquarters. So enormously rewarding, and you're doing things at really that have cutting edge implications. A country like Australia, we're very wealthy. We have well set up food regulations, and a lot of the work for WHO and FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, works with less advanced economies and working to improve food safety, and aligned with that is food security.
Great answer. Thank you very much. Now, we are running out of time, so I'm going to try and rip through a couple more questions. Pam has asked a very good question about how's the growth in food allergies and intolerances led to a change in the role for food technologists and food chemists.
There we go. How long have you got, Dave?
I mean, I do love when I take a Snickers bar and it says on the wrapper, may contain nuts.
Yeah, look, enormous challenge. It's almost an epidemic in Australia, and located as I am in Melbourne, Melbourne is sort of almost the epicenter globally for food allergens and food allergenicity. It's a problem that we don't understand why it's increasing. We have very strict requirements in Australia for labelling for the how many is it now, Fiona? 14 different allergens? 11. And at this point in time, we haven't declared celery and mustard as an allergen, but that's the case in the European Union. So it's probably only a matter of time before the work is done in this country. We just recently, 2 years ago, added lupins to the list of substances which are allergenic that need to be declared on a food package.
I've never even heard of a celery allergy.
Yeah, I think food allergen is one of the shining examples of how the industry can work together. So I've been working, and I'm passionate about food allergy and food allergen management. And back in 2003, we all got together as an industry and said, we're going to have to do something about this because the regulations changed in 2002.
Yeah.
And we knew that as an industry, we had to do something about it. So we ran a 2-day conference, and at the end of it had a workshop and said, okay, how's industry going to manage this? And out of that half-a-day seminar, we came up with 6 projects. And those projects, the first one was starting what's now called the Allergen Bureau. So that's basically a one-stop shop for food allergen management information. That's an industry-funded, industry-run organisation. So that's still running. We created the product information form, which is still around. It's a one template that's used across the industry for collecting information about products. It started off collecting allergen information, but now it collects everything. What else to come out of that? The Allergen Bureau, the product information form. Even now as industry, we have the Allergen Collaboration, which is a massive stakeholder group right across industry, clinicians, regulators, patient support groups. So we've got Allergy and Anaphylaxis Australia. It's Australia and New Zealand. So if you go onto the FSANZ website, you can visit the Allergen Collaboration website. And we've been working with the National Allergy Strategy, we're helping them develop training for, restaurants, catering, front of house staff, chefs, as well as educating the food industry. So, way back in 2003, we had a group of Americans who came out and talked to us about food allergen management. And we started to float these ideas about having, for example, a product information form that was commonly used across industry. And I remember Steve Taylor, who's sort of the guru in allergen management in the US, and he said, "Oh, you'll never make it work. You'll never get industry to work together." And I remember looking at him and said, "You've just challenged an Australian and told them they can't do something. Watch this space." And, one of the beautiful things about the industry is Steve comes back here every couple of years to work in industry or to run workshops. And he remembered that he'd said that to me. And he said, by God, you've done it.
Well done. Well done.
So, Australia, if you look at the Australian industry, we can stand up and, if you're in allergen management, you'll know about the vital risk assessment process. That's held up globally now. And that started as a group of food scientists sitting together and saying, how are we going to manage doing a risk assessment and providing allergen management information to industry and helping consumers.
Mm-hmm. Bathika has asked, sticking with you for a moment, Fiona, Bathika has asked the question about, what about chemical engineers, people with chemical engineering training in food? What percentage of your members or what opportunities amongst the Aifst zone is
probably not a lot of chemical engineers, because they tend to be probably more in, we have another kind of sister organisation called the Australian Food Engineering Association. So, I think I have the greatest admiration for food engineers, because I failed badly at that subject issue. I think they've got a lot to offer. When you talk about manufacturing techniques these days and understanding how we manufacture food, and be innovative. Absolutely, there's definitely a role for them there.
Okay, and so just for Bathika's benefit, say the name of that other organisation again, please.
Australian Food Engineers Association.
Okay, something we'll have to look up, Bathika.
Yep.
All right.
Or contact me and I'll, tell you all about it.
I can add this to as an engineering. Both of my manager is an engineering background, so she doesn't have a food background, and the general manager who was before the manager of the food department and innovation also have an engineering background. So it definitely can work all together.
Okay, no worries, excellent. Abhilasha has asked, I'm currently working as a water quality analyst in environmental sector. I worked in the agricultural sector back in India as a food chemist. I also have a master's degree in food science and technology, specialized in cereal tech. At what level or role could I change my stream from water to food? Do I have to undertake any further study? It's a very difficult one.
I would say she's got very good qualifications already. I think, it's really about going out there and seeing what roles are available. Ashna and Leo are shining examples of putting yourself out there. And, I noticed one of the questions you've got, so I'm probably jumping a bit, but, what advice would you give to people is get out there and network, get in front of people, introduce yourself, be interested. I've sat next to Ashna talking to people she's never met before, and she's so interesting. Dion's so interesting, because he can tell every time I hear Dion talk, he tells me a different story. I think you've got to be curious, you've got to be interested, and you've got to want to learn. and you've got to be able to talk to people. And, you know, Dion mentioned it earlier. I think all of us are passionate about making a difference in some way or another. So for me, it's around allergen management, working with consumers, and working with, the food techies of the future like Ashna and Leo.
So what are the opportunities to network in AIFST?
Well, now that we're not locked up as COVID, we run, networking events. We do webinars. We've got our annual convention coming up in Sydney in July, so we'd love to see you all there. So lots of different opportunities. We have branch committees that people can become involved in. We have special interest groups, again, that people can become involved in. So plenty of opportunities.
Outstanding.
I would like
So there's
to
a special.
add something to Abhilasha, what she wanted to know. I think it's not really about your career, like your qualifications. You have to put yourself out there. It's just a matter of just asking someone, do you want to have a coffee? Do you have a time to chat? Or on LinkedIn, can you give me some advice? Or how? They're more than happy to answer you anything. It's just a matter of putting yourself out there. The worst case scenario, they will just say no, and that's about it. And they don't even know you. So you just need to be curious and willing to learn and be as passionate in every single moment.
Absolutely. Very well said. Now, it does bear mentioning that, Fiona, that the AIFST also has its own mentoring program.
Thank you for mentioning it. Yes, we do. And we've just launched it. I think we've got nearly 100 people on it this year, which is really exciting. One of the amazing things is that we've got a massive talent pool of, people from Dion right back who's, not as experienced, but who are passionate about wanting to help bring through younger food techies, food scientists, chemists. We don't really mind, but, they want to give back. And I think that's the amazing thing about the food industry as well, is that they see it's been a great career for me. It's been a great career for a lot of our older members, and they just want to give back and make sure that younger members have the same experiences. So yes, we have our mentoring program, which is, something that, is one of the things that I get really excited about.
Outstanding. Now, we're more or less out of time. So I'm going to wrap up. You jumped in because I was going to say that's always my favorite question. What's your advice? What's your advice for young scientists? Dion, you haven't had your say on this one.
Grab every opportunity. Get out there. Careers are not always linear. They can take you in many different directions. So that last question about being a water analyst, if you get an opportunity to jump into the food industry, do it. Your skills will be transferable. And when it comes to the question about extra study, when I came and started to work in horticulture 18 months ago, I'd had experience in horticulture, but I went and visited some farms and I immersed myself in learning as much as I could. Then I could bring in my skills from dairy and seafood and meat, etc. And they're transferable. So never cease studying, never cease learning. Follow up, be curious.
Look, I completely agree with you, Dion. Never cease learning. I'm not sure how I feel about study, though. I think study is a long and a slow and expensive way to get yourself a job. I think that the much better way is to be active in your networking, be forthright in your networking, approach Fiona, approach yourself, Dion, make those connections, use those connections is a faster and more effective way of getting a job. There's a difference between study to get a job and study to build a career.
Yeah. I meant study very loosely. When you ask what a normal day looks like before, Thursday last week, I was in a board meeting. I get a text from this person from AIFST called Fiona. She says, "What do you know about foreign matter in vinegar?" There'd been a newspaper article in Canberra. And so I did a quick amount of study, I'll call it study, learning all I could about Acetobacter, acetic acid producing bacteria in pellicles. We were able to provide an answer to this news service and it was published that afternoon.
I thought you knew that off the top of your head.
I knew some of it, but I had to confirm a few things. So, that was an example. So when I say learning, I don't mean, yes, we've done our formal studies, but then there are things that we can get engaged in, whether it's our own personal study, or it might be a 1 week short course or something like that.
Surely we have to be a lot more careful how we use the terminology. If you say foreign matter, don't we have every right-wing dog whistle politician coming out saying, I don't know, shouldn't that matter have a visa or something? So.
True. Yeah, I've not thought of it like that.
Can I just say, sorry, one other thing that I think is important is being respectful of everybody that you have the opportunity to learn from. So whether it's, someone working in the factory, operating a machine, the cleaners, the maintenance guys, I learned so much off students. Every single opportunity that you have to interact with somebody, you need to learn something, because it's showing respect. But also, it's going to enrich you. So,
absolutely. Ashna, I'm going to give you the final word for the evening. What's your one last piece of advice? You've made the transition from study to the workforce to a job that you love. What's your big piece of advice?
I think you really need to be passionate. You need to be passionate about what you do. And if it is food industry or it is food, it doesn't matter every day how chaotic your day is, you're going to love every single moment. So be passionate about what you want, and this will lead you to your final destination. And like Dion said, it's never going to be linear. You never know. Take the opportunity as it grows. Network, I think if it was not for my network, I don't think I'll be here today. So yes. Network is the way to go, and I think through my network, I think I know all of you, because I met Dave at the RACI and I was a mentee, and I know Fiona because I was a member at the AIFSD. I know Dion because he's a member at the AIFSD. So it's such a small industry, and you end up meeting the same people over and over again. So just be passionate and network, and you'll be fine.
Absolutely. And just remember, to anyone listening here, when you need help, you can always reach out to us. Us organizations, we want to help you. All we have to know is who you are and what you need, right? That's what we're here for. That's why we exist. Okay, so that's it for this evening. I'll read my final wrap up, as I always do. Tonight has been another event as part of the RACI Careers Development Program. Through webinars, networking events, mentoring, lectures and workshops, the RACI Careers Development Program aims to help graduating students and early career scientists get the best possible start in their careers. Our upcoming career events include Mental Health in the Workplace, which is being organised by the Victorian Early Career Chemist Group next week on Thursday. And the following Thursday, our monthly online networking initiative, Camaraderie, 6th of May, 6:30 p.m. Sydney time. The recording of this event will be uploaded to the RACI Careers Development YouTube channel over the next few days, as well as to our careers site at raci.org.au. In the meantime, our thanks to Fiona, to Dion and Ashna for your time, for being here tonight, and thanks to our sponsors, DCS Technical, Envirolab and Laboratory Credit Union. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.